welcome everybody. It's time once again for The Next Chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Once again, it's good to be here with you at OC Talk Radio. So I'm wondering, Paul, are you ready for Christmas?
I thought I was, but I got all this Advent stuff to get through here, and I'm not even sure what I'm doing.
Well, hopefully today we can help get you there, because today we're going to consider even more important things about getting ready for the chaos of Christmas. We plan to delve into the depths of our soul as we ponder the most important aspects of Christmas, which is the incarnation of the Christ and how he has impacted the entire world. Now, today begins the fourth and final episode of Advent with Father Robert Edwards of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. The reason for the shows on Advent is to add clarity on the importance of the arrival of Jesus, his teachings, his actions, and his saving grace. In the last three shows, we've talked about the coming of Jesus and how it brought light into a world of darkness, how the humility of Jesus and how humility is needed for all of us. And thirdly, last episode, we talked about hope, which was my favorite episode thus far. One thing Jesus brought into the world was hope, something we all desire to feel in our hearts. Today, I want to talk about what I consider to be the most understated and yet most important gifts that Jesus brought into the world, which is peace. I believe that peace may be perhaps the most desperate longing of every single person in the world. When the angels appeared to the shepherds at the birth of Jesus, one of the things they proclaimed was, "Glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth toward mankind." And yet, peace is a much ignored topic in Bible discussions. That surprises me. So I want to change that today with Father Robert Edwards of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, and I don't know if I said it's in San Juan Capistrano, California. So, Robert, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Charlie. Good to be back.
As usual, I've really enjoyed our time together. It's here officially, and the time that you and I spend talking theology and going back and forth. And I just love the way you think, both very practically and yet deeply in concert with Christian spirituality. You have a way about making spirituality accessible to all people, no matter their religious preference. I really love it.
You're too kind, Charlie.
No,
and with that, it's a great show today.
Well, I'll tell you what was great was your sermon last Sunday. That was
very kind.
That was remarkable. So, peace. Some time ago, a few years ago, I researched the number of times two words were mentioned in the Bible: love and peace. And I discovered that love is the most used word, and it was used around 620 times. But peace is also mentioned over 400 times. And yet peace is almost ignored. In fact, in the Old Testament, I think one could make an argument that peace is one of God's most referred to promises. That he has peace for his people, and that he offers them both physical peace, emotional peace, spiritual peace. And so I ask you, as a preacher, why in the world is the gift of peace so rarely, if ever, even preached about, and why do we ignore this most needed gift?
Nothing like starting off in the deep end.
Yeah, no more softball.
Right.
We're just going right into it.
Well, I would think we do talk about peace. First of all, at least in the Episcopal Church, there's a lot in liturgy about peace. But even beyond that, it seems to me that peace is something that has to be experienced first and then talked about. And so, hopefully, what's happening in any setting is that we have some kind of experience with the incarnate, with the transcendent God that causes us to understand there's something else happening in our life. And from there, once that happens, once we begin to settle down, then you can talk about peace. But I think, it just to walk in and say, let's talk about peace without any kind of experience would be difficult to do. So I think it's kind of a twofold thing. One is there's experience of peace, and then there's also the talking about it.
I may change the verb and say from experiencing peace is to tasting peace.
Oh, there you
because
go.
I don't know we get it. I don't know we get a chance to experience it as to the full extent that we can experience it, that is promised in Scriptures. But I think we get to taste it.
Yeah, no, I think you could make a great statement for that. And there's that whole concept of when we consume Eucharist, we're bringing all of our body into this experience. So it's not just a head thing; it's a whole physical thing. And peace is something that it doesn't reside just in the mind; it resides throughout ourselves.
Yeah, like the book that we're both reading right now by Ryan Holiday, Stillness is the Key, and he does peace of mind, peace of spirit, peace of body.
Exactly.
And that he really argues for the sense of solitude, the sense of comfortness, the sense of maybe confidence in the present and the future. Is peace peace to me represents some kind of confidence in the future that I'm comfortable with what's going to happen, and I'm comfortable with what's happening. And and I noticed that in the birth narrative in the Gospels, in Luke, Luke writes that the angels made a proclamation to the shepherds at the birth of Jesus, and they didn't say glory to God in the highest and love in all the world. They said in all the world peace. That's a profound. I mean, that's the beginning. That's the start. And we focus so much on love, which I'm not disagreeing with the focus on love, but I do have concern about the lack of focus on peace and the need for peace in each one of us. How profound that is, and God promises peace, and yet we don't discuss it that much.
Yeah. And God promised peace and delivered peace. I think we would, that all spirituality would point to that. That the angels say peace on earth. That all of creation has been, infused with a sense of peace, and that every one of us has a place within us, as I'm speaking right now, that is peaceful. And so the whole point is that it has been delivered. It's just a matter of finding our way back to it. But it's not something that we're going to attain in the world. It's something that's already been given us.
And we have to access it somehow.
Yeah, or open up.
It's helpful if we helpful if we access it to some degree.
I mean it's there for the taking. It might seem. I always like to tell people about spirituality. Spirituality is not difficult. It just might be something that we're not familiar with.
Yeah.
In other words, so things that we're not familiar with seem difficult. Like the first time I learned how to swim, that was difficult. And I had a swimming teacher who told me one day, Robert, you came into the world knowing how to swim. And I had to pause for a moment and realize, I spent 9 months swimming. And then I came into the world, so I've forgotten something I already knew how to do. And that's what peace is. Peace is, it's already within us, but we might have forgotten or lost our way in how to find it.
It reminds me of what we talked about last week with John's question to Jesus, are you the coming one? And Jesus, the expected one. And he said, I'm the expected one. And we could say peace is the expected way, or it's the expected one. But Jesus said, I'm the expected one, but I didn't come in the expected way.
Yeah.
And peace doesn't come in the expected way as do any of our prayers.
No, it doesn't come the way we think it's going to come. And so I think partially because it's not going to come on our terms. That's going to come on God's terms. And for God's terms, it means that it can't be something that we can negotiate or earn or somehow barter for. It's something that we already have.
Boy, I've never thought of it that way. That's
Yeah, and all the spirituality. Jesus says you must become a child to enter the kingdom. Most other religions all say the same thing. Is what was happening to you before you became a being walking on the earth. Who were you then? And so we've been imbued with this sense of returning to what we've been granted in the first place.
That's really insightful. I'm thinking that most of our listeners can really identify with the notion of peace, and I'm thinking of peace within my family, with my friends. So you have this emotional sort of comfortness with people. But then there's another kind of peace that's in a war-filled world, and we're looking for peace between countries and peace. Certainly in the United States today, we all long for peace. Ultimately, although peace to us would be our side winning, that's not peace.
That's not
both.
Peace.
It's both sides winning and both sides coming to having a congruent thought about it. But I think there's a sense in which peace is confidence in my future. That it, I'm not. I know that I can't. That it's not guaranteed. But I feel confident in myself that my future is going to be okay. And we're really entering an age of baby boomers where people are not confident about their future.
No.
They have not saved. They are trying to live on Social Security or find jobs, and there's a lack of confidence, and I think that really results in disconsternation and much emotional problems.
No, I would agree, and it seems to me that there's if you will, there's a worldly peace and if you will, a spiritual or a godly peace. And a worldly peace tries to get everything set in order so that I can experience peace, and a godly peace is a peace that bypasses, as we say in the church, all understanding. We say that, Paul said those great words, the peace of God which passes or bypasses all understanding. It's not something we can access through our minds, but it's something we can experience. And that's a different kind of peace than what the world is offering, for sure.
Yeah, and that's going to be a question of mine in just a moment. But I fear when St. Paul says that peace is beyond understanding, that we just go to that and we fail to attempt. I think we need to attempt to understand it. I think we need to attempt, knowing that we're never going to come up with a consonant resolution to it, but we need to try to focus on it and try to access it.
Yeah, in all emotional intelligence is operating, on the basis of the concept of peace. When we are, have a sense of well-being, we have access to better thinking and better ways, more creativity and all the rest. And when we're not peaceful and full of anxiety, we are, our minds are closed down. It's just the way we operate. It's the way we're built. So we are built to run on our gasoline, if you will, is peace. That's where we're operating in our highest levels.
And what is peace save emotional well-being? That is the most peaceful place you can be.
Absolutely.
Is have an emotional well-being
sense
status.
Of balance and well-being.
And I really am. I wrote a blog last week on what did I title the doggone blog? On emotions versus reason. How and I talked about emotional intelligence, and one of the books I was reading said the majority of wars in the world were driven by emotions, not by reason and not by some strategic. There was an emotional, and one might even argue Hitler, who wanted it, had this strategy to take over the world, but that was an ego-driven attempt, and that has a lot to do with one who is comfortable with oneself doesn't need that.
Yeah.
Now let's get let's get a little biblical, and I want to ask you about a passage that's difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
And during dinner, in his final night with his key disciples before he was to be taken by the Romans, Jesus promised this: "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful." Now, I think that's very helpful, that little line, "Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful."
Mm-hmm.
But what I wonder about is, what does it mean, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you"? What is the distinction there?
That's a great question. I mean, the world, my understanding in John's gospel is the world was the rebellion part against God. So it's not really the earth. It's it's that part that comes from a different avenue, if you will. So the way the world gives peace is, again, if we got all our ducks in a row and everything is lined up, then we can have peace. And as Bishop Chet Talton, who was a bishop here in L.A. for about 10 years, he used to say one time, the problem with getting your ducks lined up is as soon as I do, something happens to one of the ducks. So the world gives peace in a way in which everything gets lined up, and then we can experience peace. And the peace of God is a different type of peace. It comes from a different place. And so I would say, probably my favorite prayer of all time is the Serenity Prayer, because it reminds us that we get...
You say it every Sunday.
Yeah, we get serenity first, and then you get knowledge.
Why don't you tell everybody what the
Serenity Prayer is a very simple prayer. Grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change those things, and the wisdom to know the difference. But the way the world thinks is, if I had wisdom, then I could get serenity. And the Serenity Prayer reminds us that there's another route. It's possible for us to have, to have serenity, and then we'll get wisdom. And so it's starting there. And we have to start there as compared to end there. We're not going to think our way into peace. It's something that it's already been given us. So we can't do anything to obtain something we already have.
If I understand you correctly, would you say that the peace Jesus offers is personal peace, and the peace the world offers is more corporate peace, that especially with warring and the Romans coming in and taking over Israel at the time. Do you think there's something in that?
Yeah, I think it's outward in versus inward out. That outward in says when everything is lined up, we can experience it. Inward out says we already have it, and then we go from there. But you have plenty of, throughout history, we have person after person after person who wound up in egregious situations who still spoke of peace, and over and over and over again. And they're just literally just hundreds of thousands of people who have journaled about this. So we know there's something there. We just do. Even beyond anything we find in Scripture and the like, we know there's something there.
Yeah, and in the most trying of situations, one of the things I was writing here is that peace is something. We had talked about this, the cosmic nature of peace, as Richard Rohr wrote about the universal Christ,
mm-hmm.
and that Christ existed before the creation of the world, and all of the world has his imprint on
mm-hmm.
it, and that peace is something the entire world participates in. And you were talking about creation and God are becoming are becoming one again, and God is restoring the hope and peace, but it is his last gift.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at the Christmas story, for me, is so amazing, because first of all, you have the star lines up. So it seems to me, what does the star represent? Beyond everything else, it represents the fact that the universe is in on this. And then secondly, you see Jesus born in the manger with animals all about. So all of God's creatures are in line with this. And the third part of the Advent story then is us. And that's the cross for us, is that on the cross, Jesus says to the thief, "Now today you will be with me in paradise," which means Eden. That God is finally, at that moment, restored peace to his entire creation, including humanity, which we were the most rebellious and therefore probably the third act in the play.
I really like that. I think we could probably do a whole series on, not a whole series, but a whole session on cosmic peace. And
oh yeah, well, I mean, how many people? Whenever somebody talks about going into the wilderness, have you ever heard anyone say, "I went out into the wilderness and I came back full of anxiety"? We don't do that. We go into the wilderness and we wander around and say, "Wow, that was amazing." No one, we have water features in our backyards because we're trying to replicate what's already in the midst of us all over the place.
It's like Japanese gardens.
Exactly. I mean, all we're, anything that we're doing, we're not, all we're doing is replicating what already is. And when you put a person in nature and have them wander around, they are going to experience some level of serenity.
And we did that on the way over here. We walk always from the club to the studio, and you just pointed out something I've walked now over 100 times and not noticed the trees.
Beautiful.
And you just said, look at these trees. Look at the peace of the trees. They are just there. They are experiencing the reality of what's around without anxiety, without frustration. They're
there for the taking, and we spend a lot of time focusing on hurricanes and all the rest and all the different places where nature is having a bad day. But how about all the rest of those days? That tree was, you could smell the eucalyptus, you could see the leaves shimmering in the wind, you could hear them. I mean, it was a living icon for peace.
I love where we're going, and I have more. But before I do that, I think it's time that we take a brief break, and then we'll come back. Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and my special guest is my dear friend, Father Robert Edwards of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church in San Juan Capistrano, and we are talking about the impacts of Advent, and on our fourth week, getting ready for Christmas week, we are talking about peace. When this will be aired, Christmas will be a week in the future, and talk about a time where there is no peace, and that everybody is hustling and bustling to get presents, get trees, get foods.
So we can have some peace.
I'm not even sure we do that until we have a fifth of liquor, and then we find the peace which we regret the day after. There was one thing you sent me an article, and so I really like to give credit to where the source came from, but I didn't pay attention to the source. So
it was Michael Gerson in the Washington Post, but I might be wrong about that.
Oh, well, thank you. So he wrote something in an article that was on Advent, and for me, one of the things that I took from it had several important ideas in the article, and one of the things that I took from it is that patience is required for the attainment of peace and hope as well. We must be patient, and we are very impatient. And he wrote this. It's a brief quote. He wrote, "This is the time of Advent, which is dedicated to expectant longings." That's very important. Expecting longings. God, we are assured, is at mysterious work in the world. Evil and conflict are real, but they are not ultimate. Grace and deliverance are unrealized, but they're certain. Let me repeat that, because I think that's really important. God is at mysterious work in the world. Evil and conflict are real, but they're not ultimate. And we look at them as them being ultimate. And yet, grace and deliverance and peace are unrealized, but they are certain. They are most certainly going to happen. And that's what came for me to understand that patience is waiting. Well, he wrote this, patience is waiting to be rewarded.
Yeah.
What do you think about patience and peace? I mean, that really struck me.
Well, it seems to me that, first of all, if we're talking about a peace that's not ours, then we're going to have to lose our ability to think that we can obtain it. And so, for instance, think of the word like disillusionment. Disillusionment, in our culture is a terrible word because we're disillusioned. But in reality, it's a great word because it's saying we've lost an illusion about something. And so we avoid like disillusionment, but we need to have illusions broken down, in other words, to be able to see what reality is. So for peace is it's all part of that. That we know, for instance, that at least in our faith, we know that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. We know that this is going to end well. We don't know how it's going to end well. So in that regard, we're always living in what that is, what we call the liminal space. We're somewhere in between, but we know the way this is going to wind up. And when you know the way something's going to wind up, when you know you're going to get to your appointment on time, you have the capacity not to be as concerned about and so God took that off the table. He said, I've come once and I'm going to come again. So we live in that space of just sheer confidence in knowing that God, no matter it's way beyond our capacity to understand how it's going to happen, but that God's going to make this good. Or when. And so Paul says that great line, we see dimly. We see dimly at times, and when we see dimly, we are required to have some patience.
Yeah, we see in a dark glass.
Yeah, we can't. Yeah, we're not going to see it. We don't have all the facts. Until we have all the facts, we know that we have a promise this is going to go well, and God has made good on His promises, at least from what we can tell throughout the Scriptures.
Well, I think one thing early on in what you were saying just reminds me of why I love chatting with you. The idea of disillusionment is healthy. Mm-hmm. We look at it as a very disappointing thing. This is wrong, that we're disillusioned. Mm-hmm. Well, you want to be disillusioned.
You need to be disillusioned.
You need to be. You may not want to be, but
it's going to be painful. I mean, anytime we lose something, anytime a fabric is torn, there is trauma caused. So losing an illusion is going to create trauma, but the end result is going to be better for us.
And you know what that assumes? Boy, I'm really going to get myself into trouble in this one. That we live in a in businesses, especially in a very goal-oriented world. And we create these goals sometimes on metrics and statistics and sometimes just on gut feelings of individual visionaries. But the reality of these, they really are illusions.
Yeah, they're all false deadlines. Every deadline is a false deadline in this world.
I just wrote about that. I just wrote about false deadlines. That somebody makes it up, and then all of a sudden, everybody's required to live by it. But it's just something somebody made up.
Go back to those trees we were talking about. They have no idea what that deadline's about. They wake up every morning, they do their deal, but the idea that they're on some kind of timetable is just simply not true.
I love that. I want to be careful not to be silent, but I do want to ponder that a minute. That's going to enter my my meditation and my journaling tomorrow. That magnificent concept of disillusionment. Now, back on that, I think peace requires patience. There's a set of stories in the Bible that really reflect this, and that's found in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, and it talks about faith, and most everybody looks at it as a faith chapter, but the author just lists a dozen people that suffered martyrdom or crucified upside down. The one that always drives me nuts is they were put into a log and sawn in half. And so there were horrible experiences of these people. And the writer goes on to say, and all these people that did all this suffering, having gained approval through their faith, so God was pleased with them, but they did not receive what was promised to them.
Well,
and that is telling me peace and hope and all. It does require patience, and God may elect not to remedy that in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
And we're not ready to accept that.
No.
You know, what good is God if He can't
make my life better right now?
Can't make my life better right now. Ergo, the prosperity gospel. Ergo, you know, even I believe in praying for healing, but you know, did God? If the person is healed, then God did it. But if they didn't, the person isn't healed, then where was God?
Wow. Yeah, and the Jewish faith is so important for us. You know, why we're a Judeo-Christian faith is because, you know, Moses is one of our main, you know, the main person who does not see the promised land. For all he goes through, he doesn't get to enter. So
because he banged a rock, for crying out loud.
Honestly, you know, but so I think that's a part of the deal with God, you know. And yet, we can be guaranteed if we went and found Moses right now, would he be? Would he not be at peace? I think we would be pretty clear he would.
Peace has been for the longest time on top of mind for me, and that you know, as I'm reading this book, stillness is the key, but peace is written by all the great philosophers. All the great philosophers will write it in one way or another. Paul wants to say something.
I just want to thank you guys for coming in here and doing this multi-part series. And I'm wondering, as you're getting closer to wrapping up here, if there's a peace that comes with the coming of Christ. Is that what the Advent precludes or leads us up to here? Are we coming to peace?
Are we coming to peace at the end of Advent? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I mean, it just occurred to me, you laid this all out, and in your last week of the fourth week of Advent, you're focusing on peace. What happens next? The birth of Christ.
Yeah.
He arrives.
Yeah.
And does that promise peace? Does that bring us peace? Is that a peaceful time? I don't know. How do we equate peace with the coming of Christ here?
Good deal.
You give him your answer. I've got mine.
Why don't you go first?
Why don't I go first? I think absolutely, and I think I personally think it is that internal personal peace. It is not the world peace that wars are going to stop, but it is that for me, it is very comforting to know that in our belief system that we are indwelt by God, and that God is giving me that peace that I have all confidence. I do pray unceasingly, but I'm not on my knees ever. I do not listen. I do not pray on my knees. I am thinking of God all the time in every situation, even in this podcast. This podcast is a prayer. I've gone into this thinking God be with us, and I have peace knowing that it's not contingent upon what I say. I have a more dependable source guiding me through this.
So it's a personal peace that you're looking for, not a worldly peace. But you did say wars don't end, and one of the common characteristics, at least World War I, World War II, some of those major conflagrations or whatever they call it, they did stop the war. Christmas bombing, you know, there's a tradition of stopping fighting over Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, That's good.
Okay, so how do you respond to that?
Well, I think sometimes you have to go outside the Scripture. Just I know that's going to be hard for your former evangelical part to hear, but I love. That's okay. I'm playing with you.
Kidding?
Silent Night. Remember that there's that great line in Silent Night: "Sleep in heavenly peace." For me, there's a sense that that statement is reminding us that when Christ came into the world, He brought peace, and there's almost a sense that this is going to be your last night of that kind of peace for a while. For the next 33 years, you are going to be that peace is going to get pushed around and knocked around and all the rest. And at the end of the day, when Jesus is in with the Last Supper, He's still talking about peace.
And look at what kind of peace did He have?
Yeah,
you're right. He was castigated.
But he imbued us. Like I said, he came into the world in a peaceful place in which the world would say, well, that was the last place you would think you want to be born. And there was peace there, and there was peace on the cross when He left. And in John's gospel, He's turning around and taking care of His mother and talking to John, his one of his companions, and saying, you need to take care of my mom, and mom take care of your new son, and that's all being said out of pease. So it is.
History says that Jesus' mother lived with John.
Yeah, and Patmos. So it's a. But I think there is this thing. A Silent Night is an important hymn in terms of just pausing for a moment, understanding that peace is about us. It's there for the taking.
Wonderful observation. I've loved our discussion on peace, and in fact it has impacted me over the thoughts of it. So I'm going to close our 4-week session with going a bit of a different direction. So I'm going priestly on you now.
Good.
So after 4 weeks on Advent and discussion on the ways Jesus impacted the world, I wonder, Father Rob, if you might give us a summary of Advent and the meaning of the season. In other words, why as we as parishioners even care about this season? The $1,000 question. I would say a couple of things. For me, I think that there's a lot to be said about Advent. And 4 weeks I think we started off thinking, how will we have enough to talk about? And I think we just figured out we could probably go every year and keep on going. But a couple of things. First of all, the whole point, and we've joked about it, but this is a season where you get to bring a tree into the house. This is a great season in which we're reconnecting with all of creation, reminding ourselves that this was not just about us; it was about all the universe being instilled with the presence of the Christ. And so that's the first thing. For children and the like, this is an incredible time, and it harkens us all to go back and reconnect with that part about us that is that we came into the world being. Secondly, I think Advent is a time that acknowledges darkness. I mean, we live in a time where, again, whether it's disillusionment or whatever else, we don't have many vehicles or places where we can just participate and acknowledge darkness. And then we're rolling up on 10 days from now, it's going to be the shortest day of the year. Our bodies know it. All of our pores know it. And yet sometimes our minds, we don't want to reconnect with that and really enter into a place where it is a bit melancholy and a bit lonely. We can explore some of the places within us, and we're given permission to do so, knowing that during this season, we will roll up on Christmas. So that part, I think, is important. And then the final part is that there is great hope. We do know that Jesus came once, and He said He's going to come again. So this is part of the beginning of opening up or reminding us of a great divine promise, and that is that just as He came the first time, He'll come again. And when He comes into the world, He doesn't do so as one that convicts and shames and blames. He comes into one who wraps His arms around us and makes us part of the divine plan. I love that. Thank you. It reminds me that one of the reasons I read Bible is because it tells the hard truth. Mm-hmm. It's not afraid to talk about the frailties of our leaders like King David and the murders and adulteries and all, and yet he's the most honored king of all kings. and it talks about darkness. And rarely do you find in Scripture or holy text the talk about darkness and the need for darkness, because I love the way you pointed out that we only know light from darkness. And that is what we're celebrating this season.
It is. Well,
Robert, thank you so much for devoting 4 days of podcast to me. And this has got to be one of your busiest seasons. I think you told me you've worked 14 straight days.
Yeah, at least. It feels like that for sure.
Well, it is such a gift and a sacrifice, and we are also grateful for you and for your time. You're a wonderful man.
Thank you, Charlie, as are you.
Thank you. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And also, please be sure to check us out on our website at thenextchapter.life. Until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.